So even though it's one person on the stage, in my mind, the audience is also the cast. And when you come to see this play, you'll realize what I mean by that. The audience is brought into this play in a way that they're culpable, in a way that they're part of the story. Basically, it's a one-person play, but I have a cast of hopefully a full house every night, and they get to share it.
That's Mick Mellamphy, the actor who's bringing his one-man show to Ireland, The Smuggler. This week we're offering an encore of an episode we released previously with actor Mick Mellamphy, actually just before he opened in a one-person play on a very hot topic at the Irish Rep. That topic has gotten even hotter, and now Mick is taking Ronán Noone's award-winning The Smuggler to Ireland. It's set in a wealthy Massachusetts island and performed in rhyme verse. It follows Irish immigrant Tim Finnegan, played by Mick, as he's pulled into the local criminal underworld after a fatal crash stirs tension between locals and migrants. And that's the hot topic playing out in the background of The Smuggler: immigration. Mick is taking this interactive show to St. John's Theatre in Listowel on July 11th. Then it's off to the Cork Arts Theatre July 16, 17, 18, and 19. Up to Belfast to the Harrison Hotel for July 23rd, 24th, and 25th. And finally, J.R. Mahon's in Dublin, July 28th, 29th, and 30th. And don't worry, the tour schedule will be in our show notes. So before he returns home with his one-actor tour de force, here's your chance to get to know the smuggler himself, Mick Mellamphy. But before we give Mick the stage, let's acknowledge our media partner, Irish Central. Given our mutual global Irish focus, we couldn't have found a better partner to have. So you'll be seeing Irish Stew episodes featured regularly on Irish Central, which brings Ireland to you, connecting and informing the Irish communities around the globe. Irish Central. And now, over to Mick in an episode Martin and I recorded in 2023. Good to be back in the stew and on Irish Stew. We talked to a lot of very busy people, but I'm not sure we've talked to anybody quite as busy on this particular moment as Michael Mellamphy, our guest, coming up in just a few minutes. He is just about an hour away from a final dress rehearsal to open at the Irish Repertory Theatre tonight in The Smuggler, and he's already confirmed that it's an excellent cast, with the asterisk that it's a one-actor show. So, Mick, welcome aboard to Irish Stew.
Thanks for having me, gentlemen. I'm really delighted to be here, and thanks for all you do for our community.
Well, we're going to get into a lot of different aspects of your Irish story, your voyage over here, some of the things you've been up to, and then dive into this play a bit, and also the Origin Theatre, which you are the artistic director of. But let's just describe for me the feeling in the wings before you step on the stage for the first time in this production, and then contrast it with that feeling in the wings once you've taken the final bow.
There's always a great sense of magic before you go on stage. The wonderful thing about the Irish Rep is it feels like home. So the one thing I always notice is it's full of familiar voices, it's full of familiar people, full of the smells. Even going downstairs, this particular play, The Smuggler, takes place in their downstairs theatre space, their studio space, which is a little smaller. You get a great sense of lively fun, I suppose is the best way to describe it. My dressing room door is basically in the corridor where people walk by. So even last night at the dress rehearsal, we were able to invite one or two people, and just hearing some of the accents, I could tell straight away where people were sitting in the audience. It's also a very involved play where I'm talking directly to audience members. So, standing backstage, waiting to go on, listening to the voices, picking out where people are sitting, I'm already working in my mind where I'm going to go, who I'm going to have that little bit of a interaction with. And it's exciting. It's fun. The butterflies are great. Butterflies are really great. And the butterflies do help lift the piece. No self-respecting actor, I think, doesn't get butterflies. And I do enjoy it. And then, again, coming off at the very end of it, walking back to the dressing room, it's lovely to hear people walking by, hearing them say nice things. Hopefully, That'll continue throughout the run. It's a thin door. There's a warning here. If you have opinions that may not be pleasant, save them for the street.
Mick, I'm going to roll the clock back a little bit. You have an unusual last name, and I took a look at that, being a bit of a genealogical nerd, and discovered that in 1901 and 1911, there were something like 8 families in all of Ireland, which are last name. All of those are concentrated down in the south of Ireland, in Cork. I also poked around at your name a little bit and understand it's, in Gaelic, it's Mellamphy, I believe.
Mellamphy, yeah.
Mellamphy, that's right.
Yeah.
Which, for those that are interested, fee means prophet and Whale means servant. So you are the servant of the prophet from the south of Ireland, as best I can tell.
There you go. I didn't know that. Somebody told me once it was the Lord of Great Wind, which made sense. But I prefer that. I prefer servant of prophet.
Yeah, but I also note that you were actually born in the Liberties in Dublin, but you spent most of your early life down in Cork. So tell me, are you a Culchie or a Jackeen?
Do you know, that's something I've struggled with all my life. And for a lot of your Irish American listeners, the best way I describe it is someone who's caught between a Red Sox and a Yankees fan. I have a deep love of both places. Obviously, I grew up in Cork, but I always had a yearning and a calling to go to the big smoke, you know. So the moment I could get up to Dublin, I did. I spent a lot of my summer holidays in Dublin. So it was always, for me, it helped me grow a little bit of thick skin, because I would arrive up in Dublin at the beginning of the summer holidays talking like I just came up from the back of beyond down below in Cork. And of course, all the locals there were like, Jesus, would you listen to this bleeding Culchie here? And then weeks would go by and I'd end up going back to school in September down in Cork. And of course, I'd show up with me proper out. How are you doing, lads? How's the bleeding going? And all my pals in school would be slagging me for being nothing but an old Jackeen. Look at him there with his fancy shoes coming down here to us. I've always been caught in between. I have a great love of both places. I love going home to Dublin, and I always love going home to Cork. So I feel it's actually a bit of a blessing to be from both places. I get a bit of the best of both worlds. And as you know yourself, they both have very distinctive sense of humours and stuff. So it's nice to be able to plug into that. Diplomacy is strong in my house.
I'm impressed of your mastery of both those accents, which are iconic Irish accents. Just as a side note, to let listeners know that might not be familiar with our Irish lingo, Culchie generally refers to a redneck. And if you're a Dubliner or a Jackeen, everybody outside of Dublin, whether they live in the boonies or whether they live in any kind of urban settlement, is considered to be a Culchie.
Yeah.
But your family then, I assume, one has to be a Dubliner, another has to be a Cork person. Is that correct?
That's correct. My mum is from Dublin. My mother's from Ballyfermot up in Dublin. And my dad is from the old Black Rock Road in Cork. And interestingly, they met on the high seas. They met working on the B&I ferry that used to sail from Ireland to the United Kingdom. And I'm pretty sure that's how I have my sea legs, because I love being on the water myself. I was born in the Coombe in Dublin, and I was actually christened in John's Lane Church, which is literally on Thomas Street. It is the heart and soul of the Liberties. The oldest wall in Dublin from the Viking settlement that is just down the road is right around the corner. So it's a wonderful part of Dublin that's steeped in lots and lots of history in the shadow of Christ Church Cathedral there. And I got my first communion suit at Frawley's. My grandmother bought it for me at Frawley's across the street there on Thomas Street. I've worked in pubs in Dublin, from Palmerstown House to Kenny's on James's Street, just down the road from the Guinness Brewery. So I have a great connection and deep love of Dublin, I have to say.
What was the pull into acting, Mick?
I've always had a bit of a penchant for performing. I'm a bit of a talker. I've never been one with my fists. I've always used my mouth to get out of funky situations. And at the age of about 7 or 8, we moved from Knocknaheeny in Cork out to Ballincollig, which is where I spent most of my youth growing up, which is a suburb of Cork City now, but back then it was considered County Cork. It was about 5 or 6 miles from the city centre. And I went to a wonderful primary school down in Inishmore, which is an estate down there in Ballincollig, called Scullbarra. A wonderful teacher at the time, who's now currently actually the principal there, Karen O'Sullivan. I remember the first day I enrolled in the school, and we walked in and they had a stage set up. And I was asking, what's that? And they were like, this is where we do our plays. And I was like, what's a play? And they're like, we get up on stage and we perform. And I was like, the panto. The panto is a big thing in Cork. The Cork Opera House pantomime every year. And I used to love going to see that with my grandmother, Kay Mellamphy. And they're like, yeah, just like the panto. So the first time they had a show going on, it was actually a musical about the life and work of Dr. Martin Luther King. So in 1986 or 1985 in Cork, you had a bunch of kids learning about Rosa Parks, Dr. Martin Luther King, about the civil rights movement here in the United States, how it related to the civil rights movement in Ireland, in the north of Ireland in particular at that time. And I guess it was the first time, obviously I didn't think like this, but in my little 8-year-old head, it was a key for me to learn. I was never a great student, but all of a sudden now I had pressure where I had to be off book. I had to learn lines. I had to work on characters. I had to work on music, had to work on history, learn about these people. And all of a sudden, it just opened up a world to me that I found interesting. And I have to say, to this day, that's still what I love about the theatre in particular, is you're always learning. There's always something new to discover. For me, that was the first step. And actually, one of the people who work at Scullbarra got in touch recently and sent me a copy of the playbill from that production. So I actually have a copy of this play, my very first play. And it's a picture of Martin Luther King on the front cover, and it stayed with me to this day.
So just for our listeners, Mick, the panto or pantomime, which is really a core piece of the Irish/English theatrical experience. Can you explain exactly what that is? It doesn't exist over this side of the Atlantic as far as I know.
It doesn't really exist here in the way it does at home. It usually, actually, it always takes place around the holidays, around Christmas time. And it's a great way for communities to get together. The big theatres would all have one going on. I know the Olympia in Dublin always had one, and the Gaiety has a panto every year. The Cork Opera House, the Everyman in Cork, they would have a panto. And generally, they follow the model of fairy tales. Like you'd have Jack and the Beanstalk or Cinderella. There's always a little bit of cross-dressing going on, and there's no fourth wall. They break the fourth wall. They interact with the audience. It's a great introduction for kids. Generally, you have kids performing in it as well. All the schools would come together from the local towns and across the city, depending on how big the panto is, and get together. So it's really a community celebration. And it goes back to the old English tradition of touring companies, people coming to town, and in the days before television and now computers, that's how people gathered. They gathered in community centres and they'd come together and commune over theatre. And it's a bit of crack. And they do actually do one here. We actually had it in our festival this year, Origin First Irish, up in the Bronx at Unbail Bucht. Don Creedon does a great job up there. And they have a holiday panto every year. And they just did Beauty and the Beast recently. And it was absolutely hilarious and was a great success.
It's a pretty over-the-top art form, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't have
very
a lot
over the top
subtlety going on.
Yeah. And I was very fortunate because I actually did end up doing a number of pantomimes in Cork as a young actor. So I would have made my heavenly grandmother, Kay Mellamphy, very proud because she'll take the credit. She was the first one to drag me through the doors. So kudos to my grandmother, Kay.
Talking of parental and grandparental support, I imagine there are many parents that dread the notion of when their child comes to them and says, I think I want to make a career in acting, or I want to be an actor.
Yeah.
So tell me about that experience in your life.
I was very fortunate. I've always had great support all throughout my life. I always recognize it. If it's not for the community of people around you, it's very difficult to do anything. But especially in this career, it can be tough. I can remember my mum going to a parent-teacher meeting in my secondary school. And all I wanted to do was go to drama school. That's really what I wanted to do. It's where I wanted to focus my career and figure out how to make it happen. And she came home from one particular parent-teacher meeting from Colum, which was my secondary school in Ballincollig, and another wonderful teacher, Fiona Leahy from County Kerry, from Tralee, County Kerry. She used to do all the school plays there at Colum. And I remember my mum saying to me, all he wants to do is act. What do we say to that? And Fiona Leahy's advice, and I remember this distinctly, and I haven't even thought about this until you just asked this question. Fiona's advice to my mum was, if it makes him happy, encourage him, let him do it. She was like, there's lots of teenagers in this school And lots of teenagers out there today, I'm sure, who don't quite know what they want to do. And my parents always were. They were always so supportive. We weren't really necessarily a theatre family. Like, we wouldn't have been in the Everyman every week seeing the latest contemporary plays. But yeah, they were very supportive. And my first professional gig was for Oliver at the Cork Opera House with the IORC, the Irish Operatic Repertory Company, back in 1991. And I just went in on an open call, auditioned for The Artful Dodger and got the part. And I think that was the time when my parents were like, okay, this is obviously something that he's into, so let's support it as best we can. And I just figured it out. I worked in bars, stayed up late working to figure it all out, and ended up attending a 3-year drama course in Dublin after I finished secondary school.
Mick, you mentioned a little bit earlier having a foot in both places, Dublin and Cork, and now we can extend that. You have a foot in Ireland, you have a foot in the U.S., specifically in New York. Tell us how you got here and what some of the early impressions and experiences were.
Yeah, well, when I finished drama school, I didn't have a plan to come to New York and get involved. I didn't have much of a plan, actually, but I did work in a wonderful bar in Dublin back in the 90s, in the late 90s, when I was in drama school. Put myself through drama school, called Eamon Doran's. There were a few of them here in the city, Eamon Doran's, as it's pronounced here. But the one in Temple Bar I worked at quite a bit, and a heavy New York influence. We would have people visiting from all over the world. Temple Bar in those days, it was the heyday of the bachelor parties and the hen parties, and the tourism industry really exploded in Ireland in the late 90s, which led to the Celtic Tiger. It was a big factor in the Celtic Tiger boom year. But I always remembered we'd get people coming in from all over the world. And I was always fascinated about where people were from. And I'd ask them, what's it like in Sweden, or what's it like in England, or what's it like in Australia? And the answer generally was always, it's nice, just a place to live. But I would ask New Yorkers, and New Yorkers specifically, they would be so animated and exuberant in their response, and expletive as well. They would use quite a few expletives to describe their city. But it was always positive. It was always colored with, it's the greatest place in the world, man. You got to go. You got to check it out. You'd love it. Come over. I got a guy. He'll hook you up. I'm like, hundreds and hundreds of New Yorkers can't be wrong. I had one friend who had actually moved here prior to me, and I stayed in touch with him. He lived out in Astoria in Queens. He's in Australia now, Joe Darcy. And I just went and booked a ticket to come over on a holiday. And May 1st, 2000, I got on a plane. It'll tell you how green I was. There was only a couple of flights at the time flying from Dublin to America. One was to Chicago, one was to New York, one was to Boston. And I was hell-bent on getting to New York, but all the flights on May 1st, May Day, were sold out to New York. So I booked a flight to Boston, flew to Boston, and just figured it out. Got a train from South Street Station, arrived into Penn, Madison Square Garden at midnight on May 1st, 2000. Oasis were playing at the Garden that night, and I walked out onto 6th Avenue. My friend Joe's bar it's gone now, but it was over on 32nd Street and 5th Avenue. And of course, me, the green little Irish fella, as green as I was, jumped in a cab a block away from the bar. And of course, about 45 minutes later, after I got a wee tour of, there's Yankee Stadium, there's the Statue of Liberty, we arrived at the bar. And that was it, yeah. And I arrived, I said, I'll give it a go, spend the summer, maybe see what happens. And 23 years later, this year actually will be my hump year, where I would have spent 23 years in Ireland, 23 years in the United States. So you can do the math out there and decide if my looks belie my years.
Talk to us a bit about beginning to put roots down in New York. So you arrive to check it out in 2000. At what point in time you're like, okay, this is for me. I'm into the acting business. How am I going to put things together? How do I establish a life?
I think for a lot of immigrants, especially a lot of Irish immigrants, I think it's a pretty common story. A lot of people don't have, I'm not speaking for everyone, but a lot of people I don't think have an actual plan of this is how it's going to go. I think a lot of people throw caution to the wind. We are unique as a group of people, the Irish people, in terms of our relationship with New York. I have friends from all over the world, and they all come here for legit jobs. They come here because a company has sent them. A lot of my Irish colleagues and friends, they come over, they get involved in the bar business, and they just make it happen. And that's what happened to me. I got over here, and within a week, I was working up at Ryan's Daughter on the Upper East Side. And what struck me and what stayed with me is the duality of New York. On one hand, you've got this wonderful community that you can be a part of. Everyone knows each other. That was something that came very quick to me, especially when you put roots down in a bar. It becomes your family, they become your friends. People look out for one another, you know. I found New York to be very warm and inviting, and I loved it. You would forget sometimes. I spent so much time on the Upper East Side that you would forget you were in like one of the largest cities in the world, like the center of so many great things, including the arts and theatre. So that first year was really powerful. Finding an apartment, I lived in a basement apartment up in Harlem on 113 in St. Nicholas in a building owned by an Irish guy who was nephews of the owner of the bar I worked at. So already this little network, it was something that I'd never learned in Ireland, this networking. And it became such a part of this New York life. The other side of the coin with New York that I love is because it is so big and it is so vast and there is so much stuff going on. E.B. White said in his essay, what was the name of that essay by E.B. White?
Oh, yeah. This is New York.
This is New York.
I think
you know, in any other place in the world, an event is the biggest thing happening on that day. But in New York, it's just, with the exception of the St. Patrick's Day parade, he pointed out, you might not even hear about it. And that's the other thing I loved about New York. I love that sense of anonymity. You can be anonymous and at the same time have a deep sense of community. That's something that kind of stayed with me from the start. I will say when 9/11 happened, about 14, 15 months later for me in September of 2001, that was the first time where I questioned what I wanted to do. Obviously, my parents were very worried at the time. I had a sister living here in the Bronx as well. She'd come over shortly after me. She's now down in Baltimore in Maryland, so she's put roots down here. Emma, my sister Emma Mellamphy, and her wife Mel, just shout out to them. I love them dearly. 9/11 was definitely a watershed moment for me. The city really came together as one, and that struck me in a way that it really, I think, solidified my roots here. I didn't want to leave. I didn't want to run away. I didn't want to go home because I'd created a home here and I had people that I cared deeply about here. So in a strange way, as horrible and tragic as 9/11 was, for me on a personal level, it definitely cemented my love affair with New York. And that's when I really started looking at, this is where I think my future lies. And that's where things started to take off for me.
Mick, we're going to get into the theater part here a little more, but I wanted to ask you about, I was looking at some videos that I found of you online, and there was one where you were talking about your role on the community board, and it came 6 years after, if I have the math right, about 6 years ago or 6 years previous that you had become a citizen.
That's right.
And you described the emotions of that moment.
No, actually, the community board business took place about 5 or 6 years after I took over Ryan's Daughter.
Oh, okay.
I became a citizen, believe it or not, the morning after Donald Trump was elected president. I was in a room full of foreign people. I was foreign myself. I was in a room full of people, and it was a bit of a strange moment. It was an interesting moment when immigration and all that was such a hot topic in that year's election, to actually be taking the test to become a citizen. There was a lot going on that morning, a lot of emotion, a lot of feelings. And it was wonderful. It was a wonderful event, being surrounded by people from all over the world, different ethnicities, different backgrounds, and sharing that experience with them. It's something that'll stay with me forever. The community board was something that I've always been interested in, community affairs. I've always been very interested in civics. I've always been interested in the history of this country, and in particular, New York. And with my work as a bar owner, you are involved in the community. So I would go to the community board events, and it struck me that there were very few business people involved. I became involved, got on the community board, and I worked there for 6 years on their street life committee. And I still have quite a lot of connections with people on the board there. I'm actually thrilled to mention that Community Board 8, which is the Upper East Side and Roosevelt Island, have recently instituted an arts committee where they're looking to bring public accessible art to all areas of the Upper East Side. The community board up there is full of very engaged and well-intentioned folks. And you can tell, just walking around Yorkville, you can tell that the community really cares about that neighborhood. It was an experience that I treasure And I'm still very much in touch with quite a few of the folks on there.
Mick, you just slid in there that you became an owner of Ryan's daughter. Most actors, as I know, usually get jobs working in pubs or bars, as you did, or a lot of time in restaurants doing waiter work. This seems a little bit of a departure. Instead of just kind of doing the basic pub job, you became an owner. So talk to me about that.
I like to be busy, as I'm sure you can gather. Yeah, again, like I had such a wonderful connection with the folks who were our customers in the community up there at Ryan's daughter. And it just came about. Myself and I had a business partner there at the time, or the guy I was working with, James Girding. We had an opportunity to take over the place. And I'd been moonlighting in both worlds and combining both worlds for quite a bit. In working at Ryan's daughter, they have a wonderful upstairs space. And I used to put on plays up there as well. We would put on work by people like John Kearns, and I would write plays myself. And we would have Nicola Murphy, actually, who's now the associate director at the Irish Rep. She had a theatre company, and they would do monthly readings, things like that. We would be involved with First Irish, for instance, every year. We would have our own production going on as part of the festival. I even got to perform for Neil Tobin. We're talking about legends of Irish and Cork stages, and he showed up one night with his wonderful daughter Fiona, who's a dear friend, and her husband Larry Lowry there. It became apparent to me that I could balance both things, and it just seemed like a natural progression. You know, we all have our little dreams and stuff. Of course, the dream is to make the acting career work, but I was also making the bar business work as well for me. And so we had an opportunity to take over the bar. We did, and I stayed involved in it for about 8 years, up to 2018. And then in 2018, my acting career took a little bit of a turn in a positive sense. And I had a conversation with my wife, Jessica DeLucia, who's my number one supporter. Again, back to support, it's so important. She has really helped me forge forward in my acting career. She's a wonderful business owner herself, so she knows what it takes to run businesses. She has an education company that is very successful called Keys to Literacy and Learning. And we sat down, we had a discussion, and basically it was back to that conversation my mom might have had with Fiona Leahy years previously. It was like, what do you want to do? And I had a bit of an actor's dream where I knew what I was going to be doing 4 months from now. I knew I had a show set up. I had another show coming up, and I was getting regular auditions for work here in the city. I was getting a couple of TV spots. And I was also working on a really well-known, at the time nobody knew about it because we weren't supposed to talk about it, but anyone who's involved in gaming now, I was working on a video game called Red Dead Redemption 2, which has proved to be very popular. It's a bit of an international hit. So this was all coming together and percolating at the same time. And I just decided, like life's too short, go with the heart. And I decided, leave the bar business behind.
You know, Mick, we've talked to a few people in acting, and almost everybody has like a portfolio of careers, and yours is really distinctive. And it sounds like in many ways you were able to chart your own course. But you mentioned something just there that Martin and I know nothing about, the world of gaming. We do know that it's absolutely huge, and we do know that it's opened up all kinds of new opportunities for actors and voiceover actors. You're listed in your bio as a performance capture artist of the cheeky Irish gunslinger Sean MacGuire in the game Red Dead Redemption 2. What is it? What does that mean?
It's a performance capture. A lot of people use the word voice actors when they talk about gaming. For Red Dead Redemption 2 and an awful lot of gaming now, they're made like how movies such as Avatar would be made. We put on the scuba suits with the little dots and you move around a space and everything is captured and recorded. So what you see on the screen and what you hear is actually us. It's like going to a theater and watching a play. In my mind, it's actually closer to theater than it is to television and film. The experience of it, I worked on this for 3.5 years. There's a camaraderie that you have in theatre with your cast and director and crew that we all built up. Basically, in Red Dead Redemption 2, it's set in the Wild West in 1899. It's all about that notion of manifest destiny. Go out into the West, make your own, create your own destiny. And it follows the story of a gunslinger, Arthur Morgan, and his gang of outlaws who are on the run. Sean MacGuire has been captured by the law, and he's going off to be tried. So they go and they rescue Sean, and we go off on lots of merry missions together and have a great time. There's about 13 or 14 characters in the gang, and we've all stayed really close and in touch. And actually, the gentleman who plays Arthur Morgan, Roger Clark, he's a wonderful actor, a very dear friend, who used to do readings upstairs at Ryan's daughter with me, by the way, when he was waiting tables. Yeah, he's become a household name now because of this game. It really is. The industry is massive. It's opened up wonderful avenues for people that just didn't exist 20 years ago. And yeah, it's great. It literally dwarfs what Hollywood is doing. It dwarfs in terms of the revenues that are created and the revenues that are spent. So it's been very interesting and wonderfully educational to get involved in all this.
I'll have to give it a try just to see you in action. Can we hear a little bit of what Sean MacGuire sounded like?
Now Sean MacGuire, he's a cheeky fella. I said him in the Liberties myself, and he's modelled after a couple of me uncles who used to give me a hard time for being a culchie growing up there when I'd come up to Dublin. So yeah, that's Sean. Sean is rooted in Ballyfermot.
I was curious about Red Dead Redemption 2, and I poked around on Wikipedia just to get a sense of the scale of the operation itself. And I came up with a couple of numbers that said it's estimated $170 million was spent on the development of the game, which actually pretty much outstrips most major Hollywood summer blockbuster budgets. And then on top of that, somewhere between $200 and $300 million in promotions. So it's an extraordinary business, it struck me. Indeed, I can imagine from an actor point of view, there's some great opportunities. So talk to me about the difference between being a theater actor and being involved in the game business, which is this massive enterprise. You're really talking about two ends of the budgetary spectrum.
Yeah, I was going to say the first difference is you can take a hell of a lot of zeros away from one and not apply it to the other. Yeah, like I said, theatre is my first love. This game has opened up lots of avenues. The one thing that's wonderful about the game is the fandom. The fans are absolutely wonderful. There's this notion that people who are into gaming are reclusive and they hide in their parents' basements and never come out into the sunlight. The opposite's actually true. What I've found from the gaming community is they're wonderfully creative, very generous. And with social media being what it is, it's quite easy to interact with people. I did my first Comic-Con event in Dublin last year, which was an absolutely wonderful event. They sat me next to Charles Martinet. For anyone out there who doesn't know who Charles Martinet is, Charles is Mario, probably the most famous video game character in the world. This is Mario. So I'm spending my day meeting Irish fans of Red Dead. And of course, the line for Mario, for Charles, is like all the way down the River Liffey, as far back as Houston Station. So I'm sitting here listening to Charles doing his woohoo, it's me, Mario, all day long. And we've actually become good friends. And again, that's another avenue that's been wonderful is, again, the friendships and camaraderie you build up. It's why I liken it to working in theatre. Obviously, in the gaming world, you do have great budgets and you've got the very best being laid on for you to be able to do your job. In theatre, especially in the theatre I'm working in, we're off Broadway, we're always struggling to make our budgets work. There's an awful lot of going to different agencies, trying to get funds in. And it's a huge chestnut, not just for theatre companies of our size, which I would consider to be small enough, but with a big heart in terms of the New York scene. But I know these are issues that the Irish Rep and the Irish Arts Centre and all these other places face, especially after COVID. So that's a challenge and a headache every day. But again, the heart and the willingness of people to roll their sleeves up and get involved with you is what's really inspiring. And that's what this festival is all about. And it is a lot of work. I'm not going to talk turkey here. There's a lot of work. There's a lot of sleepless nights. There's a lot of late hours in getting it together. But the one thing that really struck me, especially this year, because we're coming back to it in terms of a full-on in-person festival, the amount of good grace out there. You mentioned to people we're doing this festival and people just want to jump in and help, whether it's donating money, whether it's bringing projects to you. That's really been very heartwarming for me. And it's been very helpful because this festival wouldn't be happening if it wasn't for the sum of every single person involved, whether they're working as front of house, whether they're the likes of you guys who are willing to give us a space to talk about it. And whether it's the actors getting on stage, putting themselves out there, I suppose that's the gamut between the gaming industry and the theatre industry. That's how they're similar, is that people want to be involved and people want to share in it. And the big difference is, like you said, the budgets.
Mick, you're talking to us from the Origin Theatre International headquarters in New York City. And why don't you give us a sense of what is Origin? Where does First Irish fit into the picture?
Origin Theatre Company was started 20 years ago by my good friend, George Heslin, who's now the director over at the New York Irish Centre in Queens in Long Island City. When he started this company, it was with a focus to promote contemporary Irish and European work. He saw a gap in the market here. We have wonderful friends and wonderful institutions here, like I mentioned already, the Irish Rep, which is my home away from home. I love Kieran and Charlotte down there, doing great work. Obviously, we have the Irish Arts Centre now for decades on the west side, also doing great work over there with Aidan and Pauline and Rachel and all their great staff. But George saw that there was a gap here to bring contemporary new work to the New York off-Broadway scene, and that's what he started doing. You know, he worked with some of Ireland's most loved contemporary playwrights now. But 20 years ago, he was putting Enda Walsh on stage here and Marco Rowe and these people. And that's what the mission was. And the European side of things was to foster that same kind of relationship with European playwrights. And it's continued up until recently. I actually produced Kid Like Rishi by Dutch playwright Kees Roorde last June over at the Cell Theatre on 23rd Street. But 15 years ago, George invited myself and a few other people to a meeting at Robert Emmett's on 7th Avenue, which is sadly gone now. And he had this idea for a festival of Irish theatre. Again, Irish culture and Irish art is celebrated all over the world. You can't throw a stone anywhere without hitting a Grammy winner or a Tony Award winner or a Golden Globe winner that doesn't have an Irish surname. We're well represented, but he came up with this idea that it would be great in the theatre capital of the world to have a festival that celebrated contemporary Irish work. And he asked if I had anything up my sleeves, and I happened to have a really great play that year called When I Was God by Conal Creedon, a wonderful playwright from Cork. And yeah, we just put it on. Like I said a minute ago about the wonderful thing about the festival, you give people a space and they will jump right in. And we put this play on and we got picked up a year later, myself and my good friend, Gary Gregg, one of the greatest actors I've ever worked with. Sadly, he's gone on to the great stage in the sky, but his legacy lives on with us. And that's how First Irish kind of came about. George gave playwrights from Ireland and here in the US with Irish connections a chance to showcase their work. I'm sure you both know, having spoken to so many theatre professionals, it's not cheap and it's not easy to get a play on in New York. But the great thing about a festival like Origin First Irish is, with that umbrella, it's a meeting place. It's a microcosm of New York City. It's a melting pot where people can come together and share resources and split the bills and get their work seen. We regularly get wonderful reviews from the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal. We're very proud to be partnering with institutions like the Irish Rep, the Irish Arts Centre, Symphony Space, the New York Irish Centre in Queens. Ryan's daughter's involved this year, as are our friends up at Unbail Bucht, the Irish American writers and artists, Maria Deasy and those folks there are doing wonderful work. So again, that's what First Irish is. It's been going from strength to strength for years, and we're thrilled to be back in person this year.
So now that you've laid that groundwork kindly for us, it takes us up to the present moment in your new production, the one-man show, The Smuggler, which I understand is by the playwright Ronán Noone, and it has the distinction of being in rhyme.
It is.
So could you grace us with a few lines from the production, and then we'll come back and talk a little bit more about it?
I will indeed, yeah. I am an American. I may not sound like it, but I am. Got the green card, worked hard to be a citizen. And when I came here first, I went to Ellis Island. And you probably know this story, but it's worth repeating in verse. There's anecdotes on the wall from immigrants who went through that hall. And this Italian guy said a saying of old. He'd heard the streets of America were paved with gold. But on the day he got off that ship, he quickly learned 3 lines, allowing him to quip. 1, the streets were not paved with gold. 2, in fact, the streets were not paved at all. And 3, he had to, expletive, pave them all.
Great.
There we go. And you have another 69 and a half minutes of that.
John and I are really looking forward to seeing the production, which is, of course, at the Irish Rep. Tell me about the challenges of this piece. You talked about, in your acting, enjoying the ensemble experience. Obviously, this is not the case. You're alone on the stage. We had Aideen Maloney on here during the summer, and she
Love
was
Aideen.
doing
Aideen's wonderful. Yeah.
And she was doing a famous piece, or a well-known piece on Molly Bloom, and we asked her the same question. So now this is your turn at bat. Tell me about being a one, in this case, man show.
Yeah, it's fun. I wouldn't do it if it wasn't fun. Obviously, it's called a play for a reason. We get to play, and I absolutely adore it. I have performed a number of one-person shows in the past. I performed Conal Creedon's The Cure on a number of occasions at both First Irish and a subsequent production that I produced at Arlene's Grocery, believe it or not, on the Lower East Side, a rock and roll venue. That was an experience. So I'm used to doing the one-person play as well. Interestingly, from my perspective, when you talk about being alone, the one thing I try to say to people all the time is, in a theatre, you're never alone. You have your director, you have your assistant director, you have a crew of people around you supporting you. So even though it's one person on the stage, in my mind, the audience is also the cast. And when you come to see this play, you'll realize what I mean by that. But the audience is brought into this play in a way that they're culpable, in a way that they're part of the story. So in a way, basically, it's a one-person play, but I have a cast of hopefully a full house every night, and they get to share it. The only difference is that they don't get to speak, or they might. I've had reports that people have gotten up and walked out of other productions of this because we deal with themes that people might find a bit uncomfortable. To me, that's the key of all art. Art isn't just supposed to be nice and hung on a wall and get dusty. It's to challenge and to ask questions. And if you get a reaction, that's great too. But yeah, the idea of doing a one-person show, I guess the big difference is when you're doing ensemble work, it's like being on a soccer team. You've got people filling in the other positions. When you're doing a one-person play, it's more like being a boxer. And you have a team behind you, but you got to land the punches and duck and weave a bit.
Mick, you've been fantastic to hang out with us. We have such a big day ahead of you, and you took time for us. And so we really had a great time talking with you.
That was my pleasure, gentlemen. And keep up the good work. This podcasting space is a wonderful space, and you get to put your voice out there. And I really appreciate it. And I appreciate all you're doing for our community. So thank you very much.
So as mentioned, Mick Mellamphy is now taking the Smuggler to Ireland with stops in Listowel, Cork, Belfast, and Dublin. Make sure you see this show, and all the information will be in our show notes.
Irish Stew is produced by John Lee, Martin Nutty, and Bill Schultz. Editing, mixing, and mastering by Bill Schultz. Music on Irish Stew was composed and performed by Rosa Nutty, with Donald Bowens on drums, Cathal O'Riordan on bass and synthesizer. For more on Rosa Nutty's music, please visit rosanutty.com.